The arena breathed like a living beast. Its walls were not stone, not metal, but something stranger, polished obsidian that pulsed faintly with currents of alien energy. Above, thousands of banners shimmered in holographic brilliance, each bearing the sigils of conquered species. Beneath those banners sat billions of spectators, not in flesh but in projection, their voices carried through every channel of the galactic net. They watched from homeworlds and orbital stations, crowded into bars, temples, command centers, or huddled alone in cramped tenements. The spectacle needed no introduction. Once more, a human had been caught. Once more, the Zurak Dominion promised to humiliate the unpredictable predators of Earth. "Observe," the announcer crooned, his voice slithering across the frequencies like a scalpel dipped in honey. "Observe as inevitability reclaims chaos. Observe the end of myth." A spotlight knifed through the gloom, landing on the figure crouched against a fractured Dolo Major Elias Mork, his visor cracked, his suit dented, one knee bleeding where the armor had split. He did not flinch under the weight of billions of hostile eyes. Instead, he tilted his chin, almost amused, as if all this, the roaring crowd, the collapsing walls, the suffocating atmosphere, were nothing more than theater performed for his private entertainment. The suspense of the moment tightened like a noose, yet his calm smile cut through it with razor defiance. The announcer's next words fell like a verdict. "You are cornered, human. There is no escape." On cue, steel shutters slammed shut across every visible corridor. Razor-thin beams of light stitched across the ceiling, tracing invisible tripwires. Conduits opened in the walls with serpentine hisses, spilling vapor into the air that smelled faintly of acid and scorched oil. The labyrinth adjusted itself for the final act, sealing every hypothetical exit. Spectators leaned forward, hungry for the kill, certain that this was routine, inevitable, unshakable. But Elias only chuckled. It wasn't loud, not enough to carry above the announcer's voice or the crowd's roar, but the cameras magnified the twitch of his mouth, the faint shake of his shoulders. And then he spoke. "Escape?" he said, voice dry and unhurried, perfectly audible now that the feed locked onto him. His words echoed through every receiver, into every home, into the ears of every child and every soldier tuned in to the spectacle. His smile grew sharper. "Who said I was trying to escape?" Suspense broke into confusion. The crowd faltered, murmurs rippling like a tidal wave. For the first time in countless years of this blood ritual, the script had been disrupted, and in that disruption something dangerous flickered to life. From the far gate came the sound of thunder given flesh. Each step landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. The beast was arriving. Jarn, the Dominion's engineered colossus. 12 feet tall, corded muscle wrapped around a lattice of steel, tattoos of glowing circuitry scarring his skin. Around his neck, a collar hummed with a low, cruel frequency, the Dominion's leash, ensuring obedience, suppressing memory, snuffing out rebellion before it could bloom. He had fought in 100 arenas, slain 1,000 victims. To the crowd, he was the Dominion's proof that nothing could resist conditioning, not even a creature once proud, once sentient. Jarn entered the chamber, his head low, eyes hidden under the shadow of his bone-plate brow. The ground trembled beneath his weight. Suspense clamped down on the audience again, this time spiced with anticipation. The script demanded that Jarn strike quickly, overwhelm the human, deliver the Dominion's lesson in efficiency. But Elias did not move to flee. He did not even raise his weapon. Instead, he lifted his visor with one gloved hand, revealing eyes that met the beast's without a flicker of fear. The entire galaxy leaned closer to their screens. What game was this? What madness did the human think he could play at? The emotional tension hummed, balanced perfectly between dread and curiosity. The announcer's voice rose, straining to seize control of the narrative. "Behold the inevitability of order. Behold the instrument of consequence." Yet his words lacked their usual certainty. The crowd was no longer chanting. They were whispering, confused. Elias finally shifted, not backward but forward, taking one deliberate step toward the towering monster. "They built you to kill me," Elias said softly. His voice carried on the amplifiers, amplified into every corner of the galaxy. "But you weren't always theirs." Jarn's massive fist flexed, claws scraping the obsidian floor with a screech. The collar at his neck glowed brighter, warning of disobedience. His lips peeled back in a snarl, but there was hesitation there, the faintest quiver of memory. The spectators sensed it too. Suspense thickened. Was this part of the show? Or was something going wrong? The Dominion administrators shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing, hands twitching above emergency consoles. They smelled danger, though not the kind they were used to. Elias smiled again, this time softer, almost human. You don't have to be what they made. You. Those words struck like an arrow into silence. Jarn froze. His chest rose and fell like a storm barely contained. The collar crackled in warning. But for the first time in decades, perhaps centuries, the monster did not advance. Emotion bled into the suspense now. And across the galaxy, countless hearts leaned forward, desperate to know what would happen next. The arena responded with fury. Panels shifted in the walls, unleashing hidden blades that swung down in arcs meant to slice the human apart. The floor erupted with plasma vents, forcing Elias to leap aside or be incinerated. Turrets extended from the ceiling, locking onto his chest with pinpoint precision. The Dominion would not allow suspense to evolve into sympathy. They would drown doubt in blood. Yet Elias moved with purpose, ducking low, rolling across the floor, using the very traps meant to kill him as shields against one another. A plasma burst ignited a turret before it could fire. A collapsing blade sheared through a vent, plugging it shut. The crowd gasped. He was improvising, not with the desperation of prey, but with the precision of a man executing a plan. The cameras captured every flicker of motion, every gleam of his smile, and broadcasted unfiltered across the stars. Billions felt their pulse quicken, caught between fear for his survival and the intoxicating sense that they were watching something forbidden, defiance. And still, through it all, Elias kept glancing at Jarn, not as a beast, not as a weapon, but as a person trapped in chains. "They think this is the end," Elias called out, voice carrying even as explosions shook the chamber. "But I didn't come here to escape. I came here to remind you what freedom feels like." Suspense roared to life once more, no longer confined to the arena. It was everywhere, in every home, in every mind suddenly daring to imagine the unthinkable. Jarn's hesitation lasted only a breath, but in that breath the entire arena seemed to crack. The audience leaned in, administrators stiffened, and the Dominion's control system screamed with red alerts. A beast was never meant to pause. It was never meant to doubt. The collar sparked with a furious hum, forcing Jarn's body to twitch violently, his claws gouging the obsidian floor as though tearing at his own confusion. Yet his eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his ridged brow, lifted toward Elias with a flicker of something raw, recognition. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. Some jeered for blood. Others shouted demands for the Dominion to intervene, but far more watched in breathless silence. Suspense was no longer about whether the human would survive, but whether the beast would obey. Elias seized that moment like a swordsman catching the perfect opening. "They want us to hate each other," he called, dodging another turret blast that detonated harmlessly against the floor near Jarn's feet. "They want us to prove them right, that we are nothing but monsters tearing at each other's throats." His words, amplified by the arena feed, traveled through every channel, embedding themselves like seeds in fertile soil. Elias spun behind a falling blade, using its swing to sever two more turrets, then leveled his eyes back on the towering creature. His voice softened. "But you're not their proof. You're their prisoner." The collar shrieked again, flooding Jarn with pain, but the beast did not lunge. His chest heaved, torn between command and memory, and in the pregnant silence that followed, entire galaxies seemed to hold their breath. The Dominion would not allow silence to linger. The administrator's hand slammed down on a console, and the labyrinth reconfigured itself into something more vicious. Walls shifted, folding like jagged puzzle pieces until Elias and Jarn stood in a tightening chamber. The ceiling split, and swarms of drones poured out, sleek black machines with thrumming wings, their eyes glowing a malignant red. Acid vents opened in the floor, filling the chamber with acrid steam that stung the eyes and lungs. The audience roared back to life, but their excitement carried an edge of uncertainty, as though they too wondered if this escalation was desperation. Elias ducked behind a fractured column, breathing hard, calculating. He could not survive both the drones and the beast, not unless the beast chose differently. Suspense wrapped itself around the moment like a hangman's rope. "You know what they've done to you," Elias shouted, coughing through the fumes. "You remember the chains, the cages, the screams they forced from your throat." He pulled something from his belt, small, battered but precious. A holographic projector. He thumbed the switch, and for a brief moment, An image flickered into the poisoned air. A woman laughing. A child's hand reaching for a kite against a blue sky. The hologram was cracked, static-ridden, but alive. Real. Elias held it up not like a weapon, but like a prayer. "This is why I fight," he whispered, voice carrying with sudden intimacy across the entire galaxy. "Not to escape. To remind myself there's something worth breaking chains for." The drones closed in, their red eyes blazing. The crowd screamed for blood. The caller shrieked at Jarn to finish the kill. And then suddenly one massive hand rose, swatting 3 drones from the air, sending them crashing in smoking ruin to the floor. The crowd gasped. It was not supposed to happen. Yet it had. Emotion swept across the silence like a tidal wave. For the first time, Jarn turned not as a beast but as something closer to a man. His chest heaved, his collar sparking, his claws curling and uncurling as though relearning what choice felt like. The drones shrieked and swirled, dozens of them diving toward Elias, but the human did not move. He stood still beneath the flickering hologram of his lost family, his eyes locked with Jarn's. Suspense stretched, unbearable, every heartbeat a thunderclap. The arena's commentators shouted over one another, trying to control the narrative. "It's a trick. It's human deceit. The beast will crush him, he must." But those words rang hollow, swallowed by the silence of billions watching. Jarn's roar split the air, not of obedience but defiance. And in that roar centuries of forced servitude cracked. He swung one massive arm, his claws carving through a cluster of drones, sparks raining down like meteors. The crowd erupted, some in horror, others in unbridled exhilaration. Elias ducked under the wreckage, rolling clear as Jarn turned. Not to kill him, but to shield him. The Dominion administrator slammed controls, screamed orders, but already the narrative had slipped free of their grip. Elias, panting, glanced up at the Colossus now standing between him and death. "Took you long enough," he muttered with a crooked grin. Jarn looked down, his lips twitching, the faintest suggestion of a smile forming through blood and fury. Suspense didn't vanish. It evolved, becoming something sharper, hungrier, more dangerous. For now the question was no longer whether Elias could survive, but whether one man and one freed monster could ignite rebellion in front of an empire that ruled the stars. And for billions watching across the galaxy, the answer was no longer certain. The arena could not contain what it had unleashed. With each shattered drone, Jarn's defiance grew more tangible, more contagious. The audience that once bayed for blood now found themselves whispering, shifting, questioning. The Dominion's propaganda had painted humans as fragile, desperate things, creatures to be mocked in death. But Elias had not only survived, he had bent the unbendable. The administrators panicked, flooding commands into Jarn's collar until sparks flew in violent arcs across his massive shoulders. But pain no longer dictated his actions. He reached up, claws trembling, and with a guttural snarl tore the device from his neck. Flesh burned, smoke rising from seared skin, but the collar clattered uselessly to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias looked at the discarded shackle and then at the monster beside him. "Now we fight together," he said, voice steady, though his chest heaved with exhaustion. Suspense swelled, wrapping the arena in a suffocating grip. The walls shifted again, this time opening into a gauntlet of horrors. Razor-wheeled machines, plated constructs and gouts of flame bursting from the floor. A purge protocol. The Dominion wanted no witnesses, no rebellion. They would erase both combatants in a storm of fire and steel. But Elias only smiled through cracked lips, gripping a broken spear salvaged from the wreckage. "Guess they're afraid of what happens if we win." Jarn's only answer was a roar that rattled the foundations of the Colosseum. A roar not of pain or obedience, but of war. The gauntlet closed in with mechanical precision. Blade's word saw screeched, and the floor itself cracked apart into shifting plates designed to drop prey into molten pits below. Elias sprinted across one tilting platform, his legs burning with fatigue but his mind sharp with clarity. Every trap was designed to kill, individually, never with the assumption that two would fight in tandem. He ducked beneath a swinging blade, then dove forward, shouting, "Left side!" Jarn obeyed without hesitation, his colossal fist slamming into a rotating turret that had targeted Elias, the machine, exploded in a shower of sparks, and for the first time, they moved like comrades rather than prisoners. Suspense pulsed through the audience as realization spread. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a rebellion. The Dominion announcers stammered, their voices breaking as the narrative unraveled. Unnatural. Impossible. But the crowd heard only the defiance in every clang of broken machinery. Elias felt the sting of shrapnel slice across his arm. Blood running hot, but he forced himself forward, refusing to yield. Jarn shielded him from another volley of darts, taking the poison-laced steel into his own flesh with a grunt. He wavered but did not fall. Elias pressed the battered hologram, projector against his chest as though drawing strength from the fading image of his family. Emotion clashed with suspense, fueling him, keeping his body moving long past its limits. Together, man and monster carved a path of ruin through the Dominion's inescapable labyrinth, and in that chaos, a seed of hope germinated across billions of screens. But the Dominion had one final cruelty prepared. As Elias and Jarn stumbled into the center of the gauntlet, panting, bloodied, the floor began to glow with a violent crimson light. Symbols etched into the obsidian pulsed like a beating heart. Suspense coiled tight, suffocating. Above, the administrator's voice boomed, shaking with rage. If the galaxy must watch, then let them witness annihilation. The sterilization core activated. A sphere of blinding energy began to form around the chamber, designed to disintegrate everything within. No remains, no message, no defiance. Jarn staggered, the poison in his veins finally dragging him to one knee. Elias dropped beside him, clutching the failing projector. Static hissed. The hologram of his family flickered, fragments of laughter lost to distortion. For a moment, despair threatened to break him. Yet in that fragile second, he saw the beast once, a symbol of the Dominion's dominion, lower its massive head in exhaustion, and something fierce ignited inside Elias. He stood, trembling but resolute, and shouted into the roaring energy storm, "You wanted proof of human weakness? Then let this be the last lie you tell." He drove the hologram projector into a control node sparking from the floor. The device shattered, releasing not just an image but the full payload Elias had hidden within. A signal virus, a cascade of truth. Billions of screens across the Empire erupted into chaos, not with curated propaganda but with raw, unfiltered footage of the arena, of the rebellion of one human refusing to bow. Emotion surged through the galaxy as every chain felt a little looser, every collar a little weaker. Suspense had reached its crescendo, and the galaxy could no longer look away. Across the galaxy, silence fell. The feeds that had always been polished with Dominion filters now showed raw chaos. Jarn shielding Elias, drones exploding, the human holding up a flickering image of his family with trembling hands. The carefully maintained illusion cracked, and billions stared as truth poured through like sunlight into a tomb. On frontier stations, enslaved species gasped, some weeping as they saw the beast hesitate, resist, choose. On core worlds, citizens whispered treasonous words for the first time. If the beast can defy them, why not us? Suspense hung like a storm cloud, yet beneath it emotion surged like a rising tide. In the arena, the sterilization core pulsed brighter, drawing power from deep reactors. Jarn's chest heaved as he collapsed to one knee, poison burning through his veins. Elias staggered, every muscle screaming, but he forced himself to the control dais, slamming his fists uselessly against it. "It won't stop," he growled, teeth gritted. Sparks rained as the system built to erase them reached its climax. Above, the Dominion administrator's voice shrieked with fury, cracking with desperation. "End this broadcast. Seal the feeds." But it was too late. The virus Elias had planted spread like wildfire, every attempt to censor only amplifying the feed across black markets, pirate relays, even Dominion military comms. The administrator's face flushed with terror as he realized he was no longer in control. And in that moment, Elias turned to the camera. Blood streaked across his face, his eyes burning with fury and defiance. "We are not prey," he whispered, voice trembling yet resolute. "Not anymore." The sterilization core reached critical charge. Energy coiled overhead, a sphere of white fire that would obliterate everything within seconds. Suspense was unbearable. Every viewer knew what came next. Elias closed his eyes, preparing to die, when a sudden tremor rattled the arena. Jarn, poisoned and broken, forced himself upright once more. His massive frame shook violently, but his eyes gleamed with raw determination. "Not yet," he rumbled, the words torn from a throat unused to speech. The crowd gasped, then erupted, some in disbelief, others in thunderous cheers. The Dominion commentators stammered, silenced by the impossible. Jarn wrapped one clawed hand around a fractured pillar of obsidian and tore it free with a roar that shook the foundations of the Colosseum. Sparks of energy scorched his flesh, but he did not falter. With a single titanic throw, he hurled the pillar into the sterilization core's housing above. The impact was catastrophic. The core buckled, energy arcing wildly, feedback loops spiraling through the Dominion's control network. Entire sections of the arena collapsed, drones falling lifeless as systems overloaded. Elias dove for cover as flaming debris rained down, shielding his face with one arm. Suspense snapped into chaos as alarms blared across the Dominion's fleet. Containment breach. Systems compromised. But beneath the roar of destruction, the emotion was undeniable. A beast long enslaved had spoken. A monster had chosen rebellion. And alongside him, a human had shown the galaxy what defiance looked like. The administrator refused to accept it. His holographic projection flickered across the collapsing arena, his voice shrill with madness. "Kill them! Kill them both!" Security doors thundered open, and armored Dominion guards poured into the gauntlet, weapons blazing. For a heartbeat, Elias feared it was the end. Too many soldiers, too much firepower. But then something remarkable happened. The first wave of guards stormed forward, only to hesitate. They had seen the broadcast too. They had witnessed the beast tear off his collar, the human refusing to kneel, the administrator shrieking like a cornered animal. The spell of obedience faltered. Suspense shifted again, twisting into something far more dangerous for the Dominion: doubt. One guard lowered his weapon. Another ripped the insignia from his armor. A third turned his rifle, not on Elias, not on Jarn, but on the administrator's image above. Gunfire ripped through the holographic projectors, shattering his visage into sparks. The audience erupted into chaos, some fleeing, others leaping into the arena to join what they now saw as the birth of rebellion. Elias rose slowly, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. Jarn leaned heavily against a shattered wall, his massive frame barely upright, yet his eyes still burned with fire. Together, man and beast stood surrounded not by enemies, but by the first flames of uprising. Suspense still lingered. Uncertainty hung over what the Dominion's retaliation would bring, but emotion drowned it out. Across the galaxy, slaves whispered the word they had forgotten: freedom. The arena was no longer a prison. It was a crucible, and from its fire something new had been forged. Smoke curled through the fractured walls, the air thick with the stench of ozone and blood. The sterilization core had collapsed in on itself, leaving a crater of molten glass, and the Dominion soldiers had fallen back in disarray, their ranks splintered by hesitation and doubt. Above, the administrator's voice sputtered through broken speakers, shrill and incoherent, a tyrant's rage stripped bare of power. Elias staggered to the center of the ruined gauntlet, his body little more than bruises and blood, but his spirit unbroken. He lifted his gaze to the still active broadcast drones that buzzed uncertainly overhead, transmitting every moment across the galaxy. His voice was hoarse, ragged, yet it carried with the weight of iron. "You've seen it," he said, lifting a trembling hand toward Jarn, who stood like a mountain scarred by fire, his chains shattered at his feet. "They told you we were prey. They told you we would always bow. But today you saw the truth. We are not prey. We are the storm that breaks the..." Hunter's suspense had finally given way, not to silence, but to eruption. Across the galaxy, ships of enslaved species turned their weapons against their masters. On hidden worlds, uprisings began in secret camps and labor mines. Even within the Dominion's own fleets, soldiers cast down their arms, their hearts lit with a fire they had never known before. Emotion surged through billions like a tide that could not be stopped. Jarn stepped forward, towering over Elias, his voice a guttural thunder. "No more chains," he growled, not just for himself but for every being watching. Elias looked up at him, a weary grin tugging at his battered lips. He turned once more to the galaxy, eyes burning despite the blood and exhaustion. "You think I came here to escape?" he whispered, letting the words hang in the smoke-filled air. Then louder, sharper, defiant enough to shake empires. "Who said I was trying to escape?" The crowd erupted, not with fear but with hope, with rebellion, with the first breath of freedom. And as the feed cut to black, the galaxy would remember this moment not as a death match, but as the spark that set stars ablaze.